Now, Australians took to the polls on Saturday, with Labour's Anthony Albanese emerging as the country's new Prime Minister-elect, defeating the incumbent Scott Morrison and ending a decade of Conservative rule. Mr Albanese voted to clamp down on climate change and has said Australia could become a renewable energy superpower. But what does the change of government mean for Australia, the world, and of course for Britain's trade relations with its fellow Commonwealth nation? Well, joining us to discuss this week's results is the former Foreign Minister and former leader of the Australian Liberal Party, Alexander Downer. Alexander, what did you make of this week's results?
Well, it's been an extraordinary result, really. The Liberal Party, which was the governing Conservative Party, got about 35% of the vote. Labor got about 32%. And a large number of independents and Greens ended up with, somewhere in the vicinity of the high 20s as well. So because of the way the electoral system works, preferences are distributed, second preferences of voters are distributed, and the Labor Party ended up by being the winner. But I think this is a consequence of COVID. There were months or years, 2 years of repeated lockdowns, borders being closed, all sorts of social problems emerging from this, and quite apart from anything else, a massive budget blowout as the federal government funded compensation for the lockdowns. So, people have become discombobulated about politics, really. It's not clear what the Liberal Party stands for, how it differentiates itself from the Labor Party, and the Prime Minister him personally became unpopular, so they kind of lost their way a bit, I felt, the Liberals in the end. And this is the thing about politics. You have to give people a reason to vote for you. Mm-hmm. You have to stand for things and make people think it's really, really worthwhile voting for you because you're going to do things. And they didn't have much of an agenda and much to say, really. Mm-hmm.
Well, Alexander, I think that giving people reasons to vote for you is definitely a sentiment that I can agree with. Arlene, I think you have a question?
Yeah, so it's good to see you, Alexander. And I was just wondering how you think the relationship will be between Boris Johnson and the new Prime Minister, given the fact that he is an avowed Republican, as I understand it, and may want to take the country in a different direction in respect of that.
Look, I don't think he will in relation to the Republic, because there's not much of a mood in Australia to move the country towards a republic. I think people agree with the basic proposition that it would be better for Australia to have an Australian as the head of state. But to achieve that, you'd have to not only get rid of the Queen, which would be incredibly unpopular because she's much loved in Australia, but it would lead to a great constitutional upheaval. And after all we've been through with COVID, I don't think people want a constitutional upheaval. As for relations with the UK, I think it will make a bit of a difference because the Liberal Party of Australia and the Conservative Party in the UK have always been very close, and the Australian Labor Party less committed to the relationship. Actually, Arlene, listening to you ask the question, it's worth making this point that the Labor Party has always had very much an Irish strand to it, and I don't mean Northern Irish, and so it's been, if you like, anti-English and therefore sort of anti-establishment and not very enthusiastic as it wasn't in the days of Paul Keating as the Prime Minister about the relationship with the UK. But Anthony Albanese doesn't have a reputation for being like that, actually. So I wouldn't have thought it will make a huge difference in the short term. In the medium term, there won't be that sort of bucket of love that there's been between the Australian and British governments over the last few years. That will fade.
Paul?
Alexander, in terms of the Australian Labor Party, I mean, obviously it was out of power in Australia for I think, a decade or more. Why was that? What did the Labor Party in Australia get so wrong? And what has it suddenly done right to win back power again?
Well, I don't think they have done much, actually. They haven't stood for much. They went into the election campaign with what is called a small target strategy. They didn't have too much in the way of policies, just a series of slogans of the various things they're going to do. We're going to be good for women. We're going to make the weather better. We're going to improve the climate, and, various slogans like that, but very ill-defined. I think it was much more a vote against the incumbents, really, after the upheaval of the last 2 or 3 years. So the Labor Party in Australia has never been as extreme as the Labor Party in the UK has become from time to time. So it's a much more moderate, much more middle-of-the-road sort of Labor Party, even than the Labor Party under Keir Starmer. So it doesn't frighten people, it doesn't frighten mainstream voters. But they haven't done much except, not get themselves into trouble. While the Liberal Party have been in trouble as they've wrestled with COVID and some other issues over a long period of time.